The world's population has hit a new milestone. The United Nations estimates that the number of people living in the world passed the 8 billion mark on Tuesday. It's been only 11 years since the population reached 7 billion. But the growth rate is starting to slow down. Projections say the next billion won't happen for another 15 years. And while the number of the people across the planet is growing, the population here in Taiwan has already begun to shrink. To find out more on what's causing this, reporter Eric Gao spoke with Yen-hsin Cheng, a research fellow with Academia Sinica.
So what are the factors behind the difference between the world continuing to grow in population while Taiwan is seeing a shrinking?
So this is largely caused by the population that is still growing in the developing nations. And these nations actually have a larger share of the global population, and they still have quite high total fertility rate as opposed to the developed nations. So basically what I'm saying is that the reality, quote unquote, that we are experiencing around us is not the same thing as what people are going through in, let's say, in India or in many countries in Africa. Population there are still going faster than East Asia, the America, or Europe.
For Taiwan's recent decline in population, some analysts have said it has to do with the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you explain how that contributed to Taiwan's shrinking population?
Before the pandemic, the population and fertility rate in Taiwan has already been on the decline for a long time. The pandemic just sort of adds to the long-term decrease in total fertility rate. And why is that? Because when people are faced with uncertainties, often they postpone or they avoid from having more children, postpone their fertility plan. But you see that across the globe, in Europe, in the US, and in Taiwan, all these countries that went through the pandemic all have lower fertility than the level they experienced prior to the pandemic.
Here in Taiwan, when we talk about the shrinking and aging population, one of the top concerns is economic, that we'll have a smaller workforce in the future. But aside from that, is there anything else that policymakers should be more concerned about, in your opinion?
We're going to see a shrinking share of the youth population or young adult population in the coming decade, and a growing share of the older or senior or the elderly population. And this is going to translate into the population composition of the voting population. So it's going to shift the decision makers, quote unquote. So what policymakers and governments should pay attention to is how can we ensure the younger generation's voices and then their needs and their aspiration can be properly addressed.